Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Got a new video for you today. Wanted to break down my $100 budget Ghalta Stampede Tyrant EDH deck from the new set Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Want to show you guys just how powerful this deck can be even on a budget, and show you guys that you can really punch above your weight with this deck and take some games. Surprise a lot of people here. So let's start off with the commander here. Ghalta Stampede Tyrant, 5 and triple green for a 12/12 trample, Elder Dinosaur. When Ghalta Stampede Tyrant enters the battlefield, put any number of creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. Real simple, huge beater for 8 mana, and then we're going to dump our handful of creatures onto the battlefield. Very simple there. Let's break it down, show you guys exactly what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be ramping a lot. We want Ghalta to come down really fast before turn 8, ideally. We're going to get them out on turn 4, turn 5, hopefully. Then we're going to draw a lot of cards because we're going to be dumping our hand full of rampant creatures onto the battlefield. And then we need to replace those rampant creatures just in case we fall behind. Maybe our board gets wiped. We want to make sure that we can recover from that. And then we got our big threats. These are going to be what we're dumping down with Ghalta. We want to make sure that we pack the heat on our opponents and close out the game really fast. And then we're going to be beating a lot of face. So if those sound like fun to you, then you're going to really enjoy this deck. Let's start off with our ramp. We got Arbor Elf, 1 mana 1/1, untap a forest. Landwar Elves, 1 mana 1/1, add a green. Finhorn Elves, 1 mana 1/1, add a green. And then we got Elvish Mystic, 1 mana 1/1, add a green. And then Priest of Titania, 1 and a green for a 1/1. This one's actually a little bit more pricey at $349. We're going to be adding a green to our mana pool for each elf in play. So as you saw, we are playing quite a few elves, and this doesn't just include our elves. This is any elf on the battlefield. It counts herself, obviously, and any elves that we have, but also any elves that our opponents play will contribute to this card, usually making us 2 to 3 mana, hopefully, which is really good. That's why it warrants the price of $350 in the budget deck. Next up, Circle of Dreams Druid, another one, $5.07 for a 3-drop 2/1. Add a green for each creature you control. We're going to be dumping our hand full of creatures. At that point in the game, after we cast Ghalta, it makes a lot of mana. And then before that, it helps get Ghalta out really fast with our early game creatures. Somberwald Sage, 2 and a green for a 0/1, and it taps to add 3 mana of any one color for creature spells. Really early game creature for $1.26 that makes 3 mana for creatures. This will help get Ghalta out really fast. It's good. Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, 1 green, 2/3, Elf Scout. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. And then you can pay a green and tap, add X mana of any combination of colors to your mana pool where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Ghalta is a big fat 12/12, so that's going to make us a lot of mana after we cast Ghalta. And then before then, it's going to help us get to Ghalta by making mana. The card draw is also very useful, which warrants the price of $7.36. We're trying to put our expensive stuff, our expensive cards, in places where hopefully they'll be the most impactful for us. So we got Hulking Raptor up next, a 2 and 2 green dinosaur with Ward 2. At the beginning of combat, your pre-combat main phase, you add double green. This is just ramp every main phase, we get 2 green mana, and it's really hard to get rid of because of the Ward 2. So good for us. Then we're going to continue on with more ramp here. We got Nature's Lore, search your library for a forest card and put that into play, shuffle your library afterwards. Rampant Growth, search your library for basic land, put it in play tapped, and then shuffle. Cultivate, search your library for 2 basics, 1 goes on the hand, 1 goes on the battlefield tapped. Same with Kodama's Reach. Nisa's Pilgrimage, search your library for 2 basic forests, put 1 on the battlefield and 1 in your hand. Then if you have 2 or more instant or sorcery spells in your graveyard, you search for 2 forests that go in your hand and 1 that goes on the battlefield. So you get an extra forest if you meet that spell mastery requirement, which makes this actually pretty nice. Skyshroud Claim, search your library for up to 2 forests, then put them on the battlefield shuffle. We got Utopia Sprawl, 1 green, enchant a forest. When it enters, choose a color, and then when the forest is tapped for mana, you add an additional mana of that color. And then we have got Wild Growth, whenever land is tapped for mana, adds an additional green. All these are going to be really important because their breaking points on these are in such a way that you can chain ramp together into Ghalta. So if you ramp on 1 with Wild Growth, and then you ramp on 3 with the Circle of Dreams Druid or Selvala or Somberwald Sage, and then you ramp on 4 or 5 with a Skyshroud Claim, and then you cast Ghalta on turn 5 or 6. That's kind of the dream. And then you just dump the rest of your hand with creatures, and then you draw your cards. It all starts working together once you play through it. Overgrowth, 3 mana, enchant a land. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 2 green to the mana pool. Keep in mind that Arbor Elf does exist in our deck, so if you draw these effects, the Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth, or Overgrowth, try and put them on the same land, so that way if you do draw your Arbor Elf, it can make a lot of mana, sometimes tapping for 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 mana just off of the Arbor Elf. So dream Christmas land scenario, you make 10 mana off of 1 Arbor Elf and 1 land. And then Soul Ring, 1 mana, add 2 mana. Soul Ring is good. All right, onto our card draw now. The card draw is going to be very important to keep us going after we dump our hand, to help us continue to hopefully close out the game, or if we get set back, to get back in the game and set up another game ending scenario. So first up, we got Life's Legacy, 1 and a green as additional cost stack creature, then draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. We're going to be stacking Ghalta, so you can send Ghalta back to the command zone, draw 12 cards, and then recast Ghalta, dump all the creatures, rinse and repeat. You're going to find that scenario happening often with our card draw here. Next, Momentous Fall, 2 and 2 green, instant, as additional cost stack a creature, draw cards equal to the creature's power, then you gain life equal to its toughness. As you can see, this one's a little bit better because it's an instant. Even though it does cost 2 more mana, you do get some life gain as well. So you can cast Ghalta, and if you have the mana, you can sack it with Momentous Fall, gain 12 life, draw 12 cards, and then Ghalta's ETB will resolve and you'll dump all those creatures onto the battlefield. It gets really gross once you get a lot of mana. Return of the Wild Speaker, same kind of deal here, 4 and a green instant, and then we're going to be using the draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. So that's 12 cards at instant speed. Really crazy. Shamanic Revelation, 3 and double green. Draw a card for each creature you control, then gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. All our creatures are big fatties, so we're getting lots of life, and we're dumping our entire hand full of creatures, so we're going to be drawing lots of cards because we will have lots of creatures out. Soul's Majesty, 4 and a green. Draw cards equal to the power of target creature you control. So that's 12 cards at sorcery speed. The same thing with Groot Primal Hunter. We're going to be using the -3 to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control 99% of the time. Then Rishkar's Expertise, 4 and a green. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. This one, a little bit slower because of sorcery, but you do get the 5 CMC cast as well as drawing the 12 cards. And even in these scenarios, say you have these cards and then Ghalta gets removed, you can still draw a lot of cards because of the fatties that you will be dumping. You'll be drawing 6 to 9 cards on average with these spells, even if you don't have Ghalta. So that's still a lot of cards, and it'll still get you back in the game. So these cards are still effective even without your commander out. Garruk's Uprising. Really big card for this deck, only 46 cents. 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield and you control, draw a card. So if you play this before Ghalta comes out, each creature you dump will replace itself because they will all have power 4 or greater. It gives all your creatures trample, so they're able to get in, and it makes them more threatening. And if you're able to draw this later on, after you have the creatures out, you can still replace itself by drawing a card. This card is really good for this deck. And then the coup de grace of the card draw, Greater Good. This card is so crazy with Ghalta. Let me explain this to you. This is worth the $5.52 in the budget. So it's 2 and 2 green for an enchantment. You sack a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, then discard 3 cards. Kind of like the Momentous Fall, you can drop this earlier on before you cast Ghalta. Then you cast Ghalta with the ETB trigger on the stack. You sacrifice Ghalta, draw 12 cards, discard 3 lands or whatever, and then dump your hand with all the creatures you just drew plus the creatures you already had in your hand. And then if you get board wiped, you just sack all your creatures and draw all the cards off of them. And then the next time you play Ghalta, oh boy, it is going to be crazy. This card is so insane in this deck, and it is probably the most important card draw piece in the deck, if not the most important card in the deck. Next up, we got our big boys. These are going to be the guys that we're bringing in with Ghalta, the huge fatties that will be cheating in to help us win the game really fast. So Garruk's Pack Leader's up first, 4 and a green for a 4/4 beast. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you play this before Ghalta, it's good because you get another draw off Ghalta before you drop your hand full of stuff. And then if this is one of the things you do drop with Ghalta, it will see all the other creatures that enter with power 3 or greater, and then you will draw cards off them. So this card is insanely good in this deck. Must run indeed. Kogla the Titan Ape, 3 and 3 green, 7/6. When it enters the battlefield, fights a creature you don't control. When it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, and then you can pay 1 and a green and return a human you control to its owner's hand, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. We'll drop this, it will fight something instantly, and that's pretty much all we like for him. I mean, if he sticks around, then we get to destroy an artifact or enchantment, but just dropping him onto the battlefield and then having him instantly fight something is really good because you're hoping that you untap with your board, but it's really nice when you get to do something in the instance after you play Ghalta, so that way you get some value out of your creatures just in case they go away. Next up, we got Regal Behemoth, 4 and 2 green for a 5/5 trampling dinosaur. When there's the battlefield, you become a monarch, and whenever you tap a land while you're the monarch, add an additional 1 mana of any color. This is really good because it gives us card draw and it doubles our mana if we have the monarch when we untap. We're going to be dumping our hand full of huge guys. It's hard to believe that we would lose the monarch in that turn cycle. Even if it does happen, we can still get it back pretty easily, hence the fact that we're playing huge dinosaurs and huge other beaters to get it back. It is also important for us to have the monarch. We're going to be dumping our handful of creatures onto the battlefield, which means we're going to have very few cards in our hand. Having the monarch to replace that those cards over time is really impactful and is definitely welcome. So, you know, having card draw on a huge beater kind of pulls double duty for our deck. And the mana doubling effect can't go unsaid. Soul of the Harvest, 4 and 2 green for a 6/6 trampling elemental. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Just like Garruk's Pack Leader, this is insanely good because when we dump it with all the other creatures, Soul of the Harvest will see the other creatures that entered, and then you will draw a card for each one of those. So good, so good. Replacing all the cards that we had lost, so to say. Serac and Goreclaw, 4 and 2 green for a 6/5 trample. Other creatures you control have trample, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. This creature is one of 2 cards that you'll see later on that is so important for this deck. So important. When you play Ghalta and you dump all your creatures onto play, this is one of them. Then all your creatures will enter with a +1/+1 counter and haste, which means you get to attack with them right afterwards. So Ghalta dumping all those creatures into play, and they all have trample too. They'll be slightly bigger and they'll have trample because of Serac and Goreclaw. It's unfathomable the amount of damage that you can do. You can probably take someone out in 1 turn easily with just by playing Ghalta and this being in your hand. It's so good in this deck. Ulvenwald Observer, 4 and 2 green for a 6/6. Whenever creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies, draw a card. So this will be good when we dump our hand full of stuff and it doesn't make it back to our turn. We still at least get to replace the stuff that died before our turn, so that way we can rebuild and possibly set up another Ghalta drop your hand turn. Next up, Bane of Bala Ged, 7 mana for a 7/5. When it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. This is kind of a brutal effect. If someone's not playing tokens, they're not able to replace those permanents very easily, so exiling 2 permanents you control on attack adds up, especially if we're able to attack with this 2 or 3 times. Beanstalk Giant, 6 and a green for a giant, and this is an adventure side and a non-adventure side. Card is very good in this deck for 2 reasons. It searches our library for a basic land and puts it on the battlefield for the adventure side, and then it's a huge creature on the other side. So it serves 2 purposes in our deck. It ramps us into Ghalta, and then it's a huge beater later on. So very good in this deck for sure. Dawnglade Regent, 5 and 2 green for an 8/8. When there's the battlefield, you become the monarch, and as long as we're the monarch, permanents you control have hexproof. So this is another monarch card, as I explained earlier, giving us card draw is really good to replace the things that we lost if we do end up losing them, and also the ability to give our permanents hexproof is huge. That means that only a board wipe will be able to stop our creatures. Having hexproof stops a lot of single target removal and will help us enable to untap for our turn again. Giant Ataphage, 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of Giant Ataphage. We're able to deal combat damage with this, we make another 7/7 trample, and then if those 2 7/7s deal damage, then make 2 more 7, you get the deal. It exponentially adds more 7/7 tramples. This is just a must-answer creature, and it only being 63 cents is very good for our deck. Moldgrowth Monstrosity, 4 and triple green for an 8/8 trample, and when it dies, return 2 creature cards at random from your graveyard to the battlefield. As you can see, most of our creatures are huge beaters, so if this dies, we don't mind getting 2 things back at random because they're most likely going to be really good. And it being an 8/8 trampler is very good. Palaka Worm, 4 and triple green, 7/7 trample. When it enters the battlefield, we gain 7 life, and when it dies, we draw a card. So it gives us some life gain, it's a huge 7/7 trampler, and it replaces itself if it gets removed. Very good. Plated Crusher, 4 triple green, 7/6 trample, hexproof. Hexproof and trample, very important keywords with this deck. It helps us untap with this creature, and the trample helps us get the damage through. This is basically a 1 mana more expensive Carnage Tyrant, if you want to think about it that way. Rampaging Brontodon, 5 and 2 green for a 7/7 trample. When it attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each land you control. We're going to be ramping, so this thing will be massive when it attacks. Opponents will have to trade their entire board in just to not get hit for a ton of damage from this. Huge must answer threat, as the theme is. Next up, Sandstone Oracle, 7 mana, 4/4 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you, draw cards to equal the difference. In this scenario, we're ramping out Ghalta, and we're jumping our hand full of creatures. We're going to have 1 to 2 cards left in our hand. If we choose an opponent that, say, has 5, 6, 7 cards in our hand, we're going to be drawing equal to the difference. So we're refilling our hand for free, basically. We're tempoing out all our creatures and refilling our hand. That is insane. This card is really good, and it's only 7 cents in this deck. That's really good value. Spearbreaker Behemoth, 5/2 green for a 5/5 indestructible, and you can pay 1. Target creature with power 5 or greater gains indestructible until end of turn. This just helps us untap with our board. It's mostly for the board wipes, because most targeted removal nowadays does exile. Being able to protect us against Wrath of God effects and untap with our board is really good, because then we can smash their face. Tree Shaker Chimera, 5 double green for an 8/5. All creatures able to block Tree Shaker Chimera do so, and then when it dies, you draw 3 cards. This is a way to get through damage, so if we untap with our huge beaters, we could swing all out at one person. They have to only block the Tree Shaker Chimera, they die, and then we draw 2 cards off the Tree Shaker Chimera. So it does replace itself threefold, and we take someone out of the game, hopefully, with it as well. And only 22 cents. Archetype of Endurance, 6 double green and 6/5. Creatures you control have hexproof. Creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and can't gain hexproof. So the second line of text usually doesn't matter. Opponents not having hexproof, that usually doesn't come up very often. But creatures we control have hexproof. That's super important, as I mentioned earlier with the Dawnglade Regent. We want our board to make it back to our turn, and giving our creatures hexproof is a great way to do that. Bookworm, 7 and a green, 7/7 trample. When it enters the battlefield, gain 3 life and draw a card, and you can pay 3, and you can pay 2 and a green, put Bookworm from your graveyard into your library, 3rd from the top. So this is really good because it does replace itself with the card, and you can get it back later, 3rd from the top of your deck if it does happen to die. Breaker of Armies, 8 mana, 10/8. All creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so. This is another Tree Shaker Chimera incidence. You attack one person with the Breaker of Armies, they have to block it, and then you destroy their entire board, or possibly just take them out of the game. Really good card. Copperhost Crusher, 6 and double green, 8/8 trample hexproof. As we mentioned earlier with the Plated Crusher, trample and hexproof, important keywords for our deck to help us untap with these huge beaters to get in with face damage. Enrays Forerunners, 5 triple green, 7/7 vigilance, trample haste. Enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2/+2, gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. It's important to have haste, trample, and vigilance so it stays on defense. We can get damage in the turn it comes out, and if we do happen to have the Serac and Goreclaw, it does give our creatures an Anthem and vigilance and trample, so we can pretty much close out the game if we really wanted to at that point. Giant Ankeg, 6 and double green, 8/8 trample, ward 2, and other creatures you control have trample and ward 2. It gives our creatures an important keyword, and ward 2 helps us untap with our creatures because it makes them harder to target with spells or abilities. We're trying to make our board as resilient as possible to help us untap with it and close out the game. Basically the theme of the day. Stonehoof Chieftain, 7 and a green, 8/8 trample, indestructible. Whenever another creature you control attacks against trample and indestructible until end of turn, this keeps our board around in case they want to stack block and kill our creatures, and it gives them an important keyword in trample to help us get through damage. And itself having trample and indestructible helps us untap with it. And then Terrastodon, 6 double green, 9/9, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy 3 target non-creature permanents. For each one to put into a graveyard this way, its controller puts a 3/3 green elephant token onto the battlefield. So you take care of 3 problematic non-creature permanents, and they get some 3/3s that you don't really care about because you got huge beaters. Ulamog's Crusher, 8 generic for an 8/8 with Annihilator 2, and then it has to attack each turn of Fable. I don't think we care about it attacking each turn of Fable. I'm pretty sure that having the sack 2 permanents every turn is something that we want our opponents to do. So, and we're going to be attacking every turn anyway. No downside here, just A8 Annihilator 2. really good, and it's budget. Woodfall Primus, 5 triple green for a 6/6 trample, and it has, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent and persist. So if it die, it comes back with a -1 counter on it. Takes care of a non-creature permanent for us. It has trample, and it is resilient, coming back with persist and getting that ETB again. Artisan of Kozilek, 9 mana, 10/9. When he casts a spell, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and Annihilator 2. If we put it in with Ghalta, we don't get the cast trigger, but we still get the Annihilator 2 on a huge beater. And if we did happen to hardcast this, we can get one of our beaters back from the graveyard. Godzilla Primeval Champion, otherwise known as Titanoth Rex, 7 and 2 green for an 11/11 trample, and it has cycling. If we were to cycle it, we put a trample counter on a creature we control. So in the early game, we can get rid of this if we really wanted to redraw another card, maybe attack with a creature without trample and get some damage in off a sneaky cycle, but most of the time this is just going to be an 11/11 trampler that we put in with Ghalta. Kozilek, the Great Distortion, 8 and 2 colorless for a 12/12. When you cast it, if you have fewer than 7 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to difference. It has menace, and you can discard a card with converted mana cost X to counter target spell with mana value X. You don't get the cast trigger again unless you full cast this, but you do get a 12/12 menacer that protects your board, hopefully, by allowing you to counter a board wipe or a single target removal spell, maybe, to protect your stuff. Pathrazer of Ulamog, 11 mana, 9/9 with Annihilator 3, and it can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. Usually this is just going to be 9 free damage on whoever you attacked, and they're going to have to sacrifice 3 permanent. This is a brutal card for your opponents to deal with. And then we have Ghalta Primal Hunger, 10 and 2 green for a 12/12 trample, and it costs X less to cast if X is the total power of creatures you control. We had to put OG Ghalta in here, of course, you know, just to make the flavor go round, and it's only $3 in this deck as well. Most cases you're just putting it onto the battlefield with Ghalta, but in the case that you don't and you draw it maybe the turn afterwards, it does cost 2 mana because your board definitely has X power that is more than 10. 2 mana for a 12/12 trample seems pretty good to me. Then we got Hierophant Bio Titan, 10 and 2 green for a 12/12 Tyrant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you remove any number of X +1/+1 counters from one creature you control. The spell costs 2 less for each counter removed this way. We don't care about that because we're going to be dumping it onto the battlefield with Ghalta. It is a Vigilance Reach Ward 2. Can't be blocked except by creatures with power 2 or less. So it's a huge 12/12 Vigilance Reach Ward 2, and small creatures can't block it. Huge threat for our opponents to deal with. And then we're on to our utility lands. Let's get into these real quick. Just got a few that I want to show off. Reliquary Tower, very important in this deck, having no maximum hand size, so that way we can keep all our creatures into our hand and dump them at the perfect moment. There's going to be a lot of drawing, as you see. 12 cards here, 12 cards there, 8 cards here, 8 cards there. You know, we want to keep all those cards in our hand to make this big effect go off and hopefully win the game off of it. Next up is Bonder's Enclave. Taps for Wingding, or you can pay 3 and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Having some card draw on our land base is always good, especially since, like I said, we're dumping our hand. We're going to need to replace those cards. So if we have nothing better to do on our turn, we can always draw a card. Havenwood Battleground comes into play tapped, adds a green, or we can sack it to add 2 green. So this is ramp on our land base, or one time only, you know, sacrifice it, add 2 green. Help us get to 8 mana as fast as possible. Mosswort Bridge, when it comes into play, you look at the top 4, remove one from the game face down, put the rest on the bottom, adds a green, and then you can pay a green and tap it to play the removed card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. I think that would be really easy to do since our commander itself has 12 power, let alone the things that we bring afterwards, so this will be a very easy hideaway effect to resolve. Myriad Landscape comes into play tapped, adds a Wingding, or you can sacrifice it to search your library for 2 basic lands that share land type. This helps you get an additional land in our land base to ramp out. Same thing with Blighted Woodland. This one comes in untapped, but you have to pay 4 and tap it to search your library for 2 basics and sacrifice this. Goes up +1 mana like Myriad Landscape. And then Castle Garenbrig enters tapped unless you control forest, adds a green to your mana pool, and then you can pay 2 and 2 green. Tap it to add 6 green and spend it only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. This goes +1 mana and it comes in untapped. And now let's get into some of our non-budget upgrades. I want to show you guys some good inclusions that you can put in the deck if you have the money to spare. I can also, by the way, make a non-budget list for this deck as well and post it on the channel if that's something that grabs your interest. Great Henge, very important, as I mentioned earlier, with the Grook's Pack Leader and the Soul of the Harvest. and the Garruk's Uprising. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on it and draw a card. Very easy to cast with our commander, making it only 2 mana, and then you get the 2 mana back just by tapping it and gaining 2 life. But the important part is the card draw, obviously. Whenever we dump our handful of creatures, we're drawing all those cards and putting +1 counters on them. This card is very good. Elemental Bond for the same reason. It's just an enchantment version of our Garruk's Pack Leader. Tribute to the World Tree, same thing as Garruk's Pack Leader on an enchantment, except if the creature would have power less than 3, we put 2 counters on it. Guardian Project, 3 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters, draw a card, non-token. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, we draw a card. When we dump our hand, we draw all those cards back. You see a theme. And then last March of the Ents, 6 double green, can't be countered. Draw cards equals the greatest toughness among creatures you control, then put any number of creature cards from your hand on the battlefield. If we already have Ghalta out, or one of our other big creatures, this is another way to basically get another Ghalta from our deck. It can be countered. We'll draw anywhere from 8 to 12 cards and then dump our handful of creatures. So it's basically just a Ghalta effect on a sorcery. Very good in our deck. Old Gnawbone, 5 double green, 7/7 trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. This will allow you to just chain off. So if you were to untap with your board and attack all out, with the Old Gnawbone being one of them, you make a ton of treasures, then you possibly have a new hand from your card draw spells, or you can cast another card draw spell. Maybe you can cast a Life's Legacy and then recast Ghalta and then dump your hand again. It's so good, just allowing you to take so many more game actions than if you were without it. Rolled Spine Worm, 8, 3 green, 15/15 trample. These are the kinds of cards that you want to play in this deck just because they're so cool. When it dies, you make 5 3/3 tramples, and then if it would be put in your graveyard from anywhere, shuffled into its owner's library. Just a huge 15/15 trample. This is a huge threat for your opponents. And you get to play for free. Ulamog, Infinite Gyre. The important parts here to note are that it has Indestructible and Annihilator 4, and it's a 10/10. So it'll be very hard for your opponents to answer. They have to sack 4 permanents when it attacks, and it's just a game ender. Same thing with Kozilek, Annihilator 4, 12/12, huge beater. Blightsteel Colossus, 12 mana, 11/11, trample infect. It's indestructible. If they don't block it, then they die, basically, because you only need 10 poison counters to lose. Then Apex Devastator, 8 double green, 10/10, with Cascade, 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 Cascade. This spell is actually more beneficial for you to hold in your hand and then put it into play with Ghalta. You can follow up your Ghalta turn with an Apex Devastator, provided that your board gets removed, which most likely will happen. Since you're already almost to 10 mana at the 8 mana point, you can most likely cast this next turn, which is really gross. If you were to keep your board and you play an Apex Devastator on the next turn, you most likely would hit Concordant Crossroads or Sarak and Goreclaw and just end the game right out from the start. Then Concordant Crossroads, 1 mana, all creatures you control have haste. Or all creatures in general have haste. It's the best way in green to give creatures haste. It's really good. In this deck, I don't think I need to tell you. If you drop your handful of creatures and then you give them all haste for 1 mana, you're probably going to win that game. Very important non-budget upgrade. And that'll do it. Thanks for watching, guys. Thank you for watching to the end, especially. Like, comment, and subscribe. And then I'll have the deck list in the description. And please let me know if you want the non-budget version. Have a good day, guys.